In 1911, Procter & Gamble paid physicians to declare lard dangerous to the human heart. The product they were protecting was Crisco, a hydrogenated cottonseed oil pressed from industrial waste and bleached white to resemble the lard it was meant to replace. It took 104 years for the federal government to quietly admit they were wrong. In 2015, the FDA began phasing out partially hydrogenated oils, the very category Crisco pioneered, citing cardiovascular risk. The thing they told your grandmother to throw away turned out to be safer than the thing they sold her instead. Hit subscribe. What you are about to learn is not folk medicine. It is American kitchen history. Let's get right in. Number 25. Rendering beef tallow. Before grocery store shortening existed, every farm family in America kept a rendering pot. Your great-grandmother saved every scrap of beef fat, kidney fat, suet, trimmings, and rendered it down over low heat until the fat ran clear and the solids, called cracklings, floated to the top. The trick was temperature. Too high and the fat scorched bitter. Too low and it never clarified. She held it at 250 degrees for 2 hours. The yield from 10 pounds of raw suet was approximately 7 pounds of pure rendered tallow, shelf-stable for up to 2 years without refrigeration when stored in a sealed tin away from light. A 2018 study published in the journal Meat Science confirmed that properly rendered tallow contains conjugated linoleic acid at levels associated with reduced inflammation. She did not need a study to tell her that. She had a pantry that lasted through February. But rendering was only the beginning. What she did with that fat next is what the food industry spent 40 years trying to make you forget. Number 24. The leaf lard distinction. Not all lard is equal. Your great-grandmother knew this. The fat surrounding a pig's kidneys, called leaf lard, is the purest, most neutral fat on the animal. It carries almost no pork flavor, has a smoke point of 370 degrees, and produces a pie crust with a flake structure that no butter or shortening can replicate. The trick is in the fat crystal size. Lard produces beta-prime crystals, the same crystalline structure professional pastry chefs pay a premium to achieve with European butter. Leaf lard was declared nutritionally equivalent to hydrogenated shortening in the 1992 USDA guidelines, which effectively ended commercial leaf lard processing. By 1998, fewer than 12 commercial producers remained in the United States. Today, a pound of leaf lard costs $11 at a farmer's market. Your great-grandmother got it free from every hog slaughter. She did not need a market to tell her what she already had. If leaf lard alone convinced you, imagine what the next 23 do. Hit like and subscribe. It gets darker from here. And if leaf lard was the crown of the pig, what the Jewish American kitchen did with chicken fat was its own kind of royalty, until one company decided to end it. Number 23. Schmaltz, the Jewish kitchen fat. And here is where it gets interesting. Before Crisco entered the Jewish American kitchen in 1911, marketed specifically to kosher households because it contained no lard, every Ashkenazi family in America cooked with schmaltz, rendered chicken fat. Your great-grandmother skimmed it from the top of every pot of chicken soup, strained it through a fine cloth, and stored it in a small crock by the stove. The trick was the onion. Schmaltz rendered with sliced onion and a pinch of salt develops a deep, savory quality called gray beans, the browned onion and skin solids left behind that functions as a seasoning agent in its own right. But schmaltz was not the only fat sitting quietly on the back of the stove. The next one never left the kitchen, and it should not have. Number 22. The bacon grease jar. Every Depression-era kitchen had one. A ceramic jar, a coffee can, or a wide-mouth mason jar sitting on the back of the stove, collecting bacon drippings after every morning's breakfast. Your great-grandmother never discarded a single drop. She strained it through a fine mesh to remove solids, kept it at room temperature, and used it within 30 days, or refrigerated it for up to a year. The trick was the straining. Meat particles left in the fat cause rancidity within days. Strained bacon grease remains chemically stable because its high saturated fat content, approximately 40%, resists oxidation at room temperature in ways that polyunsaturated seed oils cannot. The FDA's own food safety guidelines classify properly strained bacon drippings as shelf-stable for 30 days at room temperature. She already knew that. It was the jar on the back of the stove that told her. Now, what if the most sophisticated preservation technique your great-grandmother ever used did not involve a jar at all, but the fat of a single bird? Number 21. Duck fat confit. Before vacuum sealing and freezer storage existed, Your great-grandmother preserved duck legs for months using the fat of the same animal. Confit, from the French confire, meaning to preserve, submerges the meat in its own rendered fat at a low temperature for 6 to 8 hours, then seals it under a thick cap of solidified fat in a sealed crock. The trick is anaerobic preservation. Fat contains no water and no oxygen, creating an environment hostile to bacterial growth. Duck legs preserved this way remain edible for up to 6 months at cellar temperature, 35 to 40 degrees, without refrigeration or canning equipment. The Gascony region of France documented this technique in writing as early as 1560. It arrived in American kitchens with French Acadian settlers and remained in use along the Gulf Coast well into the 1950s, when commercial freezers made it unnecessary. Unnecessary is not the same as inferior, and while she was preserving meat in one corner of the kitchen, she was doing something equally precise with her cast iron skillet, something that modern non-stick manufacturers have spent billions trying to replicate. Number 20. Tallow for cast iron seasoning. Every cast iron skillet your great-grandmother owned was seasoned with one thing. Not flaxseed oil, not Crisco, beef tallow. The trick was thin layers. She wiped the pan with a cloth barely damp with melted tallow, placed it upside down in a 400-degree oven for 1 hour, and repeated the process 5 times. The polymerization of saturated fat onto iron creates a bond that modern food scientists classify as a form of cross-linked polymer, a coating chemically similar to the synthetic non-stick surfaces manufactured today. She did not need a lab to confirm it. She knew the eggs did not stick. She knew this. Every farm wife knew this. But what she did with that same fat in the oven, not on the pan, but inside the pie, is where things get truly irreplaceable. Number 19. Pie crust with leaf lard. Your great-grandmother did not measure. She worked by touch. 2 cups of flour, 3/4 of a cup of cold leaf lard cut into cubes, a half teaspoon of salt, and 4 to 6 tablespoons of ice water added 1 spoon at a time until the dough held without cracking. The trick was cold hands and cold fat. Lard's melting point is between 95 and 113 degrees, just above skin temperature, which means warm hands begin melting it immediately. She worked fast. She chilled the bowl. The result was a crust with visible, distinct layers. Not a crumb, a layer, because the solid fat pieces created steam pockets during baking that separated the dough. King Arthur Flour conducted a blind taste test in 2017, pitting lard crust against butter and shortening. Lard won by a margin judges described as not close. She did not need a baking company to run that test. She had a county fair ribbon to tell her, but her kitchen did not stop working when the sun went down. When the light ran out, she had already made a solution, and it came from the same rendering pot. Number 18. Tallow candles. Before kerosene lamps and long before electric light, your great-grandmother made candles from beef tallow every autumn. The process was simple and the materials were free. Melted tallow poured into tin molds around a braided cotton wick, cooled overnight, and turned out in the morning. A single pound of tallow produced approximately 4 standard candles, each burning for 3 to 4 hours. The trick was hardness. Tallow from kidney fat, suet, produces a harder, slower-burning, less smoky candle than tallow from muscle fat. She knew which fat to set aside. Tallow candles were the dominant artificial light source in America from colonial settlement through the 1850s. What Rockefeller did to the candle industry, the food lobby did to the next item. A survival food so effective that soldiers carried it into the Arctic and came back alive. Number 17. Pemmican. The U.S. Army included it in its 1944 Field Survival Manual. Your great-grandmother's equivalent was the same thing frontier families, indigenous nations, and fur traders used to survive overland travel for centuries before it. Pemmican, rendered beef tallow mixed at a ratio of 1:1 with dried powdered lean meat and pressed into cakes. The trick is the ratio. Fat below 50% by weight causes the meat to oxidize. Today, a quarter-pound pemmican bar costs $32 at specialty outdoor retailers. Your great-grandmother made a winter's worth for the cost of a slaughter. Survival food kept them alive on the trail, but what came next kept them alive at the table, and it cost nothing but a stale loaf and a warm crock. Number 16. Schmaltz on bread. You might not know this, but your grandma never needed butter. Before the industrialization of dairy, before refrigerated trucks made butter a daily staple in landlocked kitchens, your great-grandmother spread schmaltz on bread, the way today's households spread butter. The trick was the gryphons stirred back in the browned onion solids left from rendering, which transformed a simple fat spread into something with the savory depth of a cured meat. The practice disappeared almost entirely by 1960, the decade in which both margarine consumption and seed oil advertising reached their peak in American households. It did not disappear because it was bad. It disappeared because someone else's product needed shelf space. She fed her family from one pot of fat, but the next secret on this list is what she did when the cooking was finished and the soap needed making, and the process has not changed in 400 years. Number 15. Lard soap. Your great-grandmother made soap from the same fat she cooked with. Lard soap, rendered pork fat saponified with lye, produces a bar with a high stearic and oleic acid content that creates a dense, long-lasting lather and a conditioning effect on skin that synthetic detergent bars do not replicate. The trick was the lye ratio. 1 pound of lard requires approximately 6 ounces of sodium hydroxide for full saponification. Underlie and the bar stays greasy. Overlie and it burns. She measured by weight, not volume, and she cured the bars for 4 weeks minimum before use. The soap kept her skin clean, but what she used to keep the leather from cracking is what kept the farm running, and it came from the same tin. Number 14. Tallow for leather conditioning. Before neatsfoot oil was commercially packaged, and before mink oil became a hardware store staple, your great-grandmother conditioned every leather item in the household with beef tallow: work boots, harness leather, saddle straps, and gloves. She melted a small amount of tallow, worked it into the leather with a cloth while it was still warm, and let it absorb overnight. A pair of tallow-treated work boots from the 1920s, recovered during a barn renovation in Ohio in 2003, showed no cracking or fiber separation. She did not need a leather care product. She needed the same tin she cooked with. Leather conservators at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London list animal fat treatment as the recommended intervention for historic leather preservation. She was doing museum-grade conservation work on a pair of farm boots. She called it Tuesday. The leather lasted. The tools lasted too, because the same fat that softened the boots was the same fat protecting every iron surface in the workshop. And what happened when she ran out of that fat is the part nobody talks about. Number 13. Duck fat for high heat roasting. Here is the thing about duck fat. Its smoke point is 375 degrees. Its flavor contribution to vegetables, potatoes especially, is something food scientists classify as umami adjacent, a savory depth produced by the fat's oleic acid content interacting with the Maillard reaction at high heat. Your great-grandmother used it for her most important roasting tasks. The trick was the preheated pan. She put the fat in the pan and put the pan in the oven before the food went in. The potato hit a surface already at 375 degrees. It began crisping immediately. A cold pan steams. Her pan never was. And while she was perfecting the roast, she was also quietly stopping rust in its tracks, using the same substance. Wait until you hear how simple it was. Number 12. Bacon grease for rust prevention. Every tool in your great-grandmother's kitchen and in your great-grandfather's workshop was maintained with the same substance. A thin coat of bacon grease on cast iron pans, on carbon steel knives, on saw blades, on the hinges of cellar doors. Fat creates a hydrophobic barrier. It repels water, and water is the catalyst for iron oxidation. The trick was the thinness. A thick coat of grease traps moisture underneath it. A coat thin enough to barely see, wiped on with a dry cloth, creates a sealed surface that displaces atmospheric moisture from direct contact with the metal. The tools were protected. Now here is where the story turns. Because the next item on this list was not about cooking or tools at all. It was about skin. And in 1970, an industry lobbied to make it illegal to sell it. Number 11. Tallow balm for chapped skin. In 1970, the Commercial Lard and Tallow Manufacturers Association reported that sales of rendered animal fats for cosmetic use had declined by 87% in a single decade, driven almost entirely by the introduction of petroleum-based moisturizers. The lobbying group that pushed federal reclassification of tallow from food to industrial product received its primary funding from the National Cottonseed Products Association. Your great-grandmother did not know any of that. She knew that a small tin of rendered beef tallow, melted and mixed with a few drops of lavender or nothing at all, healed cracked hands and wind-burned lips faster than anything that came in a tube. The trick was the fat composition. The skin balm was hiding in plain sight, but the next secret was hiding in the wound itself, and what your great-grandmother put on a cut would shock a modern pharmacist into silence. Number 10. Lard for wound dressing. Before petroleum jelly was synthesized in 1872, and for decades after in rural households that could not afford or access commercial products, your great-grandmother dressed minor wounds with rendered lard. A clean cloth dampened with warm lard, laid over a cut or burn, then wrapped with a strip of cotton. The trick was the occlusion. Lard creates a breathable seal over a wound. It allows gas exchange, but prevents the wound surface from drying and cracking, which is the mechanism modern wound dressings replicate with semi-permeable polyurethane films. A 2015 study in the Journal of Wound Care confirmed that occlusive fat-based dressings reduce healing time in superficial burns by an average of 22% compared to air exposure. She healed the skin from the outside, but the next item is what she did before the wound ever had a chance to form. The formula was not in a pharmacy. It had been sitting in your great-grandfather's medicine cabinet the whole time. Number 9. Hair pomade from tallow and beeswax. The pomade your great-grandfather used to dress his hair on Sunday mornings was not purchased at a drugstore. It was made in the kitchen. A simple formula: 2 parts rendered beef tallow, 1 part beeswax, melted together and poured into a small tin to solidify. The trick was the ratio. More wax meant a firmer hold. More tallow meant a softer shine. He worked a small amount between his palms until it melted from body heat, then smoothed it through his hair. The result was lasting hold, natural sheen, and a conditioning effect from the tallow's fatty acid content that kept hair from becoming brittle in dry weather. A 2020 review in the International Journal of Trichology confirmed that saturated fatty acids, specifically stearic acid, measurably improve hair fiber strength and reduce hygral fatigue. He had been doing that every Sunday for 40 years before the journal existed. Though your grandfather dressed for Sunday with fat from his own kitchen, the next secret on this list is what that same kitchen fat did in the dead of winter when a child was sick. The doctor was miles away, and the remedy had to come from the shelf. Number 8. Schmaltz as a medicine. That is not the whole story. In households across the American Midwest and Northeast from the 1880s through the 1940s, schmaltz was not only a cooking fat, it was a medicine. Rendered chicken fat, warm and slightly salted, was rubbed onto the chest of a child with a cough and covered with a flannel cloth. The treatment passed down through Ashkenazi, Polish, and Hungarian immigrant families without a single written prescription. It was the standard remedy for chest congestion and bronchitis. Standard because it worked. The trick was the warmth retention. Fat holds heat longer than water-based preparations, keeping the chest warm through the night in a way that promotes circulation and relaxes bronchial muscle tension. A 2016 review in the journal Ethnopharmacology documented 47 traditional cultures across Europe and Asia using animal fat chest rubs for respiratory illness, predating Vicks VapoRub, which uses petroleum jelly as its carrier, by several centuries. She did not invent it, she inherited it. The difference between inheritance and tradition is about 1,000 years. The medicine worked, but what came next is the part that will make you look at your rusted thrift store cast iron differently, because the restoration process costs almost nothing, and the industry selling you alternatives already knows it. Number 7. Tallow for cast iron restoration. Here is what nobody sells you at the antique store when you buy a rusted cast iron skillet for $3. The restoration process costs nothing and requires one thing your great-grandmother kept in a tin. Steel wool removes the rust, heat drives off the moisture, and then tallow, applied thin, baked on, repeated 5 times, rebuilds a seasoning layer over a surface that has been stripped to bare metal. The trick is the polymerization temperature. Tallow polymerizes best between 400 and 450 degrees. Above 500, it burns off rather than bonding. She did not know the chemistry name. Tallow restored what rust tried to destroy. But the next fat on this list came from a single holiday bird, and your great-grandmother treated those 2 pounds of rendered gold like a second harvest. Number 6. Rendered goose fat. Your great-grandmother's Christmas goose produced as much as 2 pounds of rendered fat from a single bird. Not a byproduct, a goal. She collected it as carefully as she collected the meat, ladled it into wide-mouthed jars while it was still liquid, and sealed them for use through the winter. The trick was the flavor. Goose fat has the highest percentage of monounsaturated fat of any common animal fat, approximately 60%, giving it a mild, buttery flavor profile entirely unlike the sharpness of pork lard or the beefiness of tallow. She used it to sauté vegetables, to roast potatoes, and to spread on bread as a condiment. Fortnum and Mason in London has sold tinned goose fat since 1707. A 400-gram tin today retails for £14 sterling. She wasted nothing from the goose, and the next secret proves that the same was true on laundry day, when the fat that fried breakfast also washed the clothes for free from scratch. Number 5. Tallow soap for laundry. Before powdered laundry detergent existed and before Procter & Gamble introduced Tide in 1946, your great-grandmother washed clothes with a bar of tallow soap and a washboard. The soap she used was not purchased. It was made from the same fat she rendered for cooking, saponified with wood ash lye, potassium hydroxide, that she produced herself by running water through hardwood ash in a barrel fitted with a drain. The trick was the ash quality. Hardwood ash produces stronger lye than softwood ash. She tested lye concentration by floating a fresh egg. Strong enough lye floats an egg to the surface. Weak lye lets it sink. A properly concentrated wood ash lye solution converts tallow into soft soap suitable for laundry in 48 hours of cooking. She made soap from dinner. And the next secret is what happened the morning after dinner at the biscuit pan with cold lard and 2 knives before anyone else was awake. Number 4. Lard for biscuits. She did not need a recipe. 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, and 1/3 of a cup of cold lard cut in with 2 knives until the mixture resembled coarse crumbs. 4 to 5 tablespoons of whole milk. Folded, not kneaded. Patted out, not rolled. Cut straight down, not twisted. The trick was the cutting motion. Twisting a biscuit cutter seals the edge of the dough, preventing rise. A straight cut leaves the layers open. She baked them at 450 degrees for 12 to 14 minutes until the tops were golden and the sides had pulled slightly from the pan. The biscuit was perfect. But the next secret is the one that burns the deepest, because it is the one modern medicine uses quietly on its most vulnerable patients and still will not fully admit in public. Number 3. Tallow for burn treatment. Modern burn unit physicians who use tallow-based preparations do not advertise it in their discharge paperwork. They use it because it works. Specifically, they use preparations high in stearic and palmitic acid, the dominant saturated fats in beef tallow, as occlusive dressings on partial thickness burns when synthetic alternatives cause contact dermatitis. The trick is the biocompatibility. Tallow's fatty acid profile is close enough to human skin lipids that the immune system does not treat it as a foreign substance, making inflammation less likely than with petroleum-based alternatives. A 2021 review in Advances in Wound Care documented 23 peer-reviewed studies supporting the use of lipid-based occlusive barriers in burn wound management, noting that animal fat preparation showed the lowest inflammatory response rates in the literature. Your great-grandmother used tallow on burns because it was what she had. It turned out that what she had was exactly right. Medicine confirmed what she already knew. But the second item on this list goes back further than medicine, further than history, and further than any recipe ever written down, back to the first fire ever lit. Number 2. The fat lamp before kerosene. Before whale oil became commercially available to inland families, before any of that, your great-grandmother's grandmother lit her home with a shallow clay or tin dish filled with rendered animal fat, beef tallow, lard, or bear grease, with a twisted cotton wick laid across the rim. It produced a steady, low flame that burned for 2 to 3 hours per tablespoon of fat. The trick was the wick material. Loose twist cotton absorbs fat by capillary action and produces a cleaner, more complete burn than tight braided cord. Fat lamps of this design predate recorded history. Archaeological evidence of animal fat lamps has been found in caves across southern France, dated to 40,000 years before the present. She did not invent this. She inherited it from an unbroken line of women who understood that fat was not just food. Fat was energy in every form the word can mean. 40,000 years of knowledge. And what comes next is the reason all of it survived. Not a technique, not a recipe, not a temperature. Something older, something they never wrote down because they never needed to. Number 1. The whole system. Now get this. The most powerful animal fat secret your great-grandmother kept is not a recipe. It is not a technique. It is not a temperature or a ratio or a tin by the sink. It is this. She did not ask what a piece of fat was. She asked what it could become. A rendered beef sweet was not a cooking fat. It was a cooking fat, a candle, a soap, a skin salve, a leather conditioner, a rust preventative, a wood seal, and a wound dressing. It moved from the rendering pot to the pantry shelf, to the medicine cabinet, to the workshop, and never once became waste until it had exhausted every use it contained. Your great-grandmother's kitchen had one fat that did 50 jobs. Your kitchen has 50 oils that do one job badly. She did not need a study to tell her that nothing useful should be thrown away before it was finished. She had a pantry that proved it every February. We did not get smarter, we got more dependent. Try one, just one. Render a pound of beef sweat this weekend. Save your next jar of bacon drippings. Rub tallow into the cracked leather of your oldest boots. Then tell me in the comments which one you tried first, and tell me if someone in your family tree already knew every secret on this list, because I promise you, somebody did. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. Your great-grandmother knew. Now you know too.